Welcome to Open Forum on Nationalist Hub. I'm Suresh Kochattil. At one time, human resources was kind of the job that was looked down upon, many a time. Even the heads of the department did not even get called for important management meetings. Now, the fortunes have changed. One of the key players in management decisions now, Human Resources Department is getting its due share. All this was happening and then COVID hit us, and it was really hard. Many a business went down while others had to do a quick regroup and worked out ways and means to keep their employees in a productive mode. Work from home became a new buzzword in the lexicon, and this work from home mode had nothing what did not exist before. But COVID had turned the way we work upside down. Now that 2 years have passed by and COVID has more or less impacted our life back to normal, let us look at the post-COVID complications. Recruiting, training, and keeping employees in a productive mode is a huge challenge now. Lots of new lessons are being learned, something that did not teach us in management schools. Human resources managers are learning new things, new ways to deal with issues at workplace. And of course, they keep cropping up more, from persuading employees to get back to office, which is the most toughest thing, to things like quiet quitting and even moonlighting. To talk about all this and more, we have with us three experienced human resource professionals from this domain. Mr. Krishna Prasad, Senior Director, HR and Ops, India and APAC, Skillsoft. Geeta Goti, Senior Vice President, ProArc IT Solutions Private Limited. And Mr. Prasanna Kude, Vice President, HR, Avinon. Thank you all for coming to the show. As I spoke about at the introduction, the world of human resources has undergone a major change in the COVID and the post-COVID world. To put it in another perspective, we have a before COVID era and an after COVID era. Now, when you see a lot of these things happening, in your own way of looking at things, there's a human resource professional. Unlearning has happened. A lot of experienced HR professionals like you could not have even imagined in the wildest dreams that these kind of things can actually happen. Let's start by rolling out an opening round from one of you. And let me start with you, Mr. Prasad. What has changed from AC to BC? What has really changed?
Thanks, Suresh, for having me on this show. First is acceleration of digitization. I would say that is the biggest change in the post-COVID era. Digitization already existed even before pandemic, before COVID, but COVID did accelerate it 10x of what we planned. So it got back a decade of working in a virtual environment, which most of the CTOs, most of the HR were trying to implement to get through the remote work environment for the employees. So I would say that is one. And second, being there is a new working model which has evolved. There were days where there was a full-time employee, there was a contractor. Post-COVID, there's a new normal, gig workers, and now people are calling it as moonlighting for the wrong reasons. So I think there's a new work model which post-COVID era, most of the companies are adopting, in terms of hybrid work model, right? And number three is most important is there were times where companies used to do a lot of employee engagement activities, maybe throwing parties, taking them out for resorts. That has changed. It has now changed from just a mere lunches and dinners to overall well-being. I think that has kind of accelerated. I think a lot changed, but I feel these are the three things which kind of...
Work from home and return to work, both have cost pluses and minuses in the normal sense of the word. But Geeta, coming to you, in today's work culture, what do you see happening in terms of specifically in the post-COVID scenario? How do you see today's work culture? Because Mr. Prasad did talk about doing a deep dive now into employee engagement, but especially in sectors where employees are not required to come to office, being resisted by many employees of not coming to work because we are not really required, especially in the IT and ITS sector. What do you think is actually happening?
Thanks for calling me on the show. Post-COVID, the entire HR areas, the way we knew it or way we were functioning has flipped. Why I say that? The Maslow hierarchy, if you take it, now it's more of self-actualization to start with. It's no longer the safety security thing, because people are comfortable in their homes, but then they're looking for something more than that. It's not just the work, but beyond work. So to deliver that in their home while they're working, which is also a workplace, by the way, when somebody is working from home, we consider that as workplace. Certain laws also consider that as workplace. So delivering the services of HR while they are sitting at home is a big challenge. So the entire HR areas, right from hire to retire, is taking a huge shift on how do we deliver that service? How do we make that experiences mean a lot to the employee as well as to the organizations? Ultimately, it is the bottom line what we see. And the delivery of that is now making us rethink, reevaluate, and also do justice to both to the corporate as well as the employee.
When we really look at it specifically, Geeta, because as I said, as Mr. Prasad also mentioned, those good old days in terms of doing plain vanilla stuff is all over. And now we have something more than that. Actually, when you really get into things which we didn't do before and we want to do it in a different manner, I'm sure all the three of you sitting here would have actually seen that happening in a way. But providing work flexibility, as you said, for employees is a good thing in many cases. It also proves to be a motivational tool. But coming to Mr. Prasanna, where do you draw the line and say this further and no far? Are you seeing acceptance or a pushback when it comes to employees nowadays, especially in a post-COVID scenario?
Thanks, Suresh, for inviting me on this show, and I'm glad that I'm here to meet you as well. My perspective is the lines are not defined by us as corporates or as managers. The lines are defined by the business requirements. We have had several situations where certain projects had to come to office and they had to come. But we also at the same time exercise prioritization where a certain work can be done from home. Okay, and I think the biggest, we talk a lot about Corona being bad and pandemic being bad. But on the sunny side of it, I think Corona helped us broke many myths that work can only be done from office, work can be done only under better supervision. I think all those myths are now broken, and now it is more on deliverables, and it's not about time, and it's all about flexibility. So the differentiating factor or the line is drawn more by the work itself versus we as as an organization leaders are drawing it. That's where it is getting defined.
Because retaining talent is a big challenge for any company now, especially the bottom of the pyramid is still see a lot of talent pool coming in from engineering colleges and other places. But in specifically when you talk of mid-level employees, that is where your entire problem starts. They feel that either they are not going up the ladder, they are not getting paid well, and that is particularly, Mr. Prasad, a thing. Is there a more hype or there's a fact that retaining talent today, and we're being told something called quiet resignation is also happening out there. Is it, when you look at a country like India, for example, we travel long distances to work. I mean, that takes a lot of toll on employees, and especially when you're talking of having elders at home or having small kids at home, many, especially lady employees, feel that they should actually be spending more time at home, quality time. So they would love to have a work from home model, but to add it all, what I talked about earlier as a quiet resignation is happening, not just in India, but across the world that is happening today. Is there such a thing really happening, Mr. Prasad? Do you see that happening in, say, your company or the other organizations?
Yeah, I think quiet quitting, as the name, most of the organizations, most of the industry analysts are talking about it, but I would account that to the post-pandemic area where people are stuck at home, they're not meeting, they're not interacting with their peers in the office, and they're kind of isolated within their homes, and then they feel disjointed. I think that is the after effect of COVID, right? So when there is no growth and they don't see it happening because they are all at home, and that is wherein they kind of get a feel that, okay, there is no opportunities coming along, right? And that is where the concept of quiet quitting. That's at one side. The other side is, again, if you look at millennials, Gen Zs, Gen X, At one side there is an abundance of opportunities, and people are not just holding one offer, but there are multiple offers, right? The other side, mid management and the above, I think that is where you would feel, in terms of a quite quitting happening most of the cases.
Why do you think it's happening? I mean, is it because of, as I talked about earlier, saying that, one of course, is the money part of it, that people today expect a lot more in terms of what you need, but is it something else that is happening?
No, I think where you change yourself, again, when I say mid-management, people who are adopting, who are skilling and upskilling themselves, I think there is no dearth. But I think the areas where this is more happening is where, there is no scope of growth, there is no opportunity, you're not upskilling yourself. And that is where I feel, it impacts a lot.
I mean, Geeta, coming to you on this, retaining talent is a big challenge. And I remember when I handled HR for a while when I was with a big one of India's biggest hospital chains for a while, for about 6 months. For me, it was a learning experience because I never dealt with HR till then. But sooner or later, I started realizing that, throwing these parties or taking them to a resort is not really that, or employee of the week on the floor, or, putting up the pictures on the notice board. That really doesn't work. But when you're talking about the changing realities of workplace that you're seeing right now, Geeta, there's so much happening now in the world. I mean, not just in the ITS sector, particularly it's every other sector today. We are talking about knowledge economy and beyond all that. So it's all a crazy place. You must be wondering where to start if you really have to keep your employees motivated, keep them challenged at the same time.
Yeah, the challenge is much more now. One, because we are not seeing them and experiencing their everyday conversations. However, like the saying goes, different strokes for different folks. I think both the managerial talent as well as the HR, including the leadership, they have to now go and do customizing of their programs towards those employees who are there, who need a different need to be, satiated or addressed, acknowledged, rewarded, recognized. So when I'm using all these words, they look very, cliche in the HR, you have a rewards and recognition program, you have a spot bonus program. That's not working. You need to still more customize it and take it to them and, acknowledge them. Not only them, their family, because now the workplace has moved. So you have a support system in the family who is enabling them to work. So it's better you acknowledge them as well.
Actually, the overall well-being of the employees is what you're talking of, Geeta. But when you really look at it that way, there is a pressure on the budgets from the company. I mean, you have to work within certain boundaries. You can't really go extravagant. Especially this is for the small and the mid-tier companies who really struggle with their budgets. Especially in a scenario like this where we are seeing a recession looming in the US, which is the primary market for many IT companies. But when you really talked about what you said right now in terms of keeping them motivated, do you think non-cash part of it also has a big role to play?
If at all, I have to say non-cash has a much bigger role to play now than before. Because it's more to do with the well-being, the emotional connect, and also when I look at the small and medium enterprises, the cash component is always motivating, as we see. However, the fairness and equity is also being questioned. After during the pandemic, the kind of crazy salaries people quoting and you giving into that has made the bottom lines go down, and also organizations' profitability has taken a hit. So now there is a correction required. Whether it's recession or not, I think most of the top leaders are rethinking on how do we do our compensation and benefits programs. So that again, it is not only for small and medium enterprises, it is also for big corporates to rethink on how do we. I don't think if a comp and bench survey, the way it was done earlier, would have anyway help us now. So we need to come up with something different, which includes non-cash kind of a thing.
Yeah, I remember sitting with huge charts, and looking at the KRAs and then the dreaded word, the annual appraisals that come up, and which leaves many an employee, I mean, not just any, I think most of them actually feel unhappy at the end of it when they see their final increment that comes out. But Mr. Prasanna, as an HR professional, you must be caught between the devil and the deep blue sea, so go by the saying. How do you strike a balance between trying to please everyone and then drawing that Lakshman Rekha saying this further and no far?
Yeah, quite an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, HR has always been caught between devil and the deep sea. And adding to this corona, view of the subject, we have vultures roaming around our heads, So it's even more tough to, be in that kind of environment. My take on the subject is things did tank for a while, and things did go haywire, and it was going south. But I think it is not only HR who really managed this pandemic better. We were enablers, but the real change was brought by the front level leadership. I think they were the one who really embraced this as a change, because then you can't see somebody working in front of you and suddenly you have to learn the intricacies of getting into an MS Teams call and Google Drive and all Zoom and all. I mean, you have Zoom fatigue kind of thing, So, but they embraced it and they did well. But to specifically trying to answer your question, about Lakshman Rekha, where to draw it and what will enable it, I think it is empathy which is going to draw that Lakshman Rekha. I think people are reasonable. In my own experience, I feel people are reasonable as long as they see a total value in the organization. Like Geeta rightly said, now we'll have to think beyond cash. Okay, it is not only about cash. I think in the IT sector, which once upon a time was a very small sector, gave that opportunity. They gave good offices to people. They gave good career progression. They gave good training. They give good money. But I think now that sector has matured. Now money could be still a driver, but I think people look at a total value. So I think it is a treatment that's going to make a difference to really draw that Lakshman Rekha in terms of how much you ask and how much I really give you. Also, in our context specifically in Avignon, we believe that work-life balance is equally important. So we recently started this new initiative that 3 days in a week you come to office, not mandated you stay like for the whole day. You have a prime hours, you come, and then it becomes flexible. So those kind of innovative ideas probably need to come, and then also at the same time that Lakshman Rekha drawing is also enabled by some of the leadership thinking, because they influence it. Okay, so I think if it is driven by the top to the bottom, and it is no more, your citric connection is no more a scarecrow, because people know that they are being watched. It's like a CCTV everywhere, but that's not it's just for the heck of it, it's there, but we never use it kind of. So I think it is more about a treatment. It is more about creating that environment where employee feels connected, belonged. And in that case, sometimes they are okay. I earn 1,000 rupees less or lakh rupees less, but my manager is good, my organization is good, my brand is quite attractive. So I think that probably defines where it stops. Otherwise, it's a never-ending cycle.
Because quite often what happens is the employees is that it is not just working from home as such. Okay, that's good, because you really don't have to kind of get up in the morning, rush to the workplace, get into the traffic, drive. I mean, all that tension. By the time you reach your workplace, you're half fatigued out there. But I think it's also missing that culture in the office, the coffee machine culture, the chatting with the employees, being in the boardroom, and all these things actually matters a lot. And those are things I think many employees missed during the pandemic. But some of them really long to come back to workplace, but many others don't. So do you think there is that issue about some employees wanting to come back and some don't want to come back? Do you see that?
I think when this pandemic was about to get over, the whole focus, I mean, people were really missing office, because I do not see office only as an office. I see it's a social system. I connect, I chat, I discuss, I vent my frustration out. Otherwise, only you have your cat, dog at home, or your siblings at home to vent your frustration out, and they don't understand anything out of it. So I think there's a lot more value of office as a system, as an organization, as a support system where you come, you feel refreshed, you chat, you discuss, you have face-to-face time. I think that's where, office helps, in terms of, yes, future is hybrid. I quite agree with my colleague said that future is hybrid, but it can, I do not see in a context like in Asian countries where relationship matters, where there's a warmth in relationship, where there's a connected relationship. We can never be in that situation that we are permanently working from home out of that 4 rooms, and there's that coming in and knocking the door, and I mean, how long, So it is obvious that, we need that as a fabric, as a social system to work in office.
I think the US already had that system of work from home a long time ago.
It's been there.
It's just that we in India never got used to it, because we are, after all, people who connect more on an emotional level. We tend to like meet people. There is a birthday party in the office, which are pretty famous for actually. All those kind of things happen, and discussing office politics, discussing outside things, going out for movies. These are all a part of the corporate culture. But coming to Mr. Prasad, in the last few weeks, we've seen HR managers basically struggling with a concept called moonlighting. Of course, this is not a new thing. It's been happening from quite some time, known by different nomenclature. But when you really look at moonlighting as a term and as a problem, there is something called juggling few jobs around. Work from home, you never know whom is or she is working for. Is she working for your competitor, which is even worse, which is what Wipro had an issue with, and I think it's justified in one way. But when you look at the other side of the argument, when the employees talk about it, when the mid-level managers talk about it especially, they say, look, as I told you before, there's not enough money going around. I have to pay my EMIs, I have to pay my car EMIs, I have to pay my flat EMIs. All these things actually count. And at the end of the day, what's wrong if I do another job when the primary job is not getting impacted, when I'm delivering what is supposed to be delivered? I think even in security issues, remember, a lot of us, when we go home, and in the good old days, we were not even allowed to carry the laptops home, or even the laptops had everything disabled in it. But in a new scenario, when we're working from home, everything had to be enabled back again. So the question of security also goes out of the window. But Mr. Prasad, when you really look at it, is this concept of moonlighting really that big an issue as we are talking about?
Yeah, it is definitely unethical and against the employee code of conduct. There are mixed reviews, mostly tagging it as unethical, and we've seen in the news a lot of organizations terminating employees because they were straight working in the direct competition. It is again an after effect of the Great Resignation era, because the more people leave, the more people we want. The more people we want them fast. So in order to hire them fast, companies start looking out for people hook or crook. We need people. Now I think again virtually we kind of I would say not all, but few organizations have started levering down in terms of, okay, we need this person, we need to hire or onboard as quickly as possible. I would say that actually triggered the moonlighting. And obviously if a person has a niche skills, he's getting 2 offers, he's taking with both hands. But again, like I mentioned, it is sheer unethical, and it is not a good practice for the person who's taking it, for the organizations, because you tend to then lose focus on your existing job, lose focus on the other job, and most important, you lose the work-life balance.
In the argument, other side is that I'm delivering what is supposed to be delivered to the organization. So what's the problem there? I mean, we all today work as per a specific timeline, specific deliverable. There are reviews every day, morning, evening, night. We have all the Excels of the world being circulated around. So when a company feels, okay, I agree with you on one point that you cannot work for your competitor. That is just not done. But if the guy is or lady is moonlighting for, say, working in IT and working for a pharma company, delivering a consultancy mode, tomorrow he or she can quit your own company and come back as a consultant and work for 2-3 consultancies at the same time. What do the laws say actually on this, Mr. Prasad?
Yeah, so I think just to quote an analogy, you cannot have 2 marriages. Employment is just like a marriage, right? And if you have to cut one marriage, you have to file for a divorce and get into another marriage. It is as simple as that. When you are entering into a contract with an employer, you are signing and abiding by that you are working for us full time. I think that is the argument which you see what a lot of analysts, a lot of companies are fighting towards it. So I think that should answer your question of why cannot join work for 2 other companies. There is a provision. Obviously gig working is another new phenomenon. You are free as a gig worker. Only thing is you need to tag it differently. You cannot be a full-time employee and talk about another employment. You are free to do a double or triple employment, but with a different tagging, not as a full-time employment.
In fact, that's where it's a very interesting thing about, you talked about a specific thing called niche skills. I think that is where most employees, they don't want to be a vanilla kind of talent anymore. They want toppings on top of the vanilla all the time. So if you're picking up something, they want to add on skills like, for example, artificial intelligence or machine learning, or even something like metaverse or robotics, process automation. Everything is coming into play now. So when even in the pharmaceutical industry, for example, when we had COVID, we had a lot of rush to develop those vaccines in double time, not even double time, and absolutely 0 time. Usually the things take a lot of time to get developed, but there was no time for anybody to do anything. So at that point in time, we found the United States of Amirpet, as we call it famously, dolling out more people. I mean, people were being taught new things, then they let loose on the roads and saying, now you go and do what you want. But Geeta, when you look at niche skills as a field, I mean, that's where many companies today are. You are also, or still, I think, I'm a senior member of the National HRD Network, industry body. How are industry bodies reacting and trying to address this issue of getting more people trained in the technologies for future? Because there is, as I said, the United States of Amirpet, and then there are organizations which provide them on the side actually, but not really the industry. Like for example, the Pradhan Mantri Jan Kaushal Yojana, where youngsters are trained, has a specific set of deliverables for that. But I think the industry bodies like a National HRD Network now need to come together and say, fine, we will train people for the future so that they don't sit on the bench on day one onward, they're productive.
Right. So Suresh, that correction has already started off. If you look at NASSCOM's Future Skills program, they are doing it, and the entire national skills development programs are already geared up for that. Now, why are there not many takers from the corporate is the quality and the employability factors which they are looking at. But at some point, there will be a meeting point between these finishing schools and the corporate that addresses the entry level. However, the middle and the senior folks who have to reskill, upskill themselves on the latest technologies have to be addressed within the company, whatever the learning and development. I think that's not enough. We need to have one step above that, and we need to create that community of learners who would go in for niche skills. But who will teach them? That's a very small community who would do it. And who are these small communities? People who invested in themselves on the latest technologies, who have rediscovered their passion towards experimenting, curiosity, and then innovation. So those people are becoming a rare tribe now. So we need to bring them up. If they are in a corporate and they are no longer in your roles and as a permanent employee, they should be allowed to explore. So for that, again, the labor laws, we need to rejig a bit, in the sense when Prasad was talking about unethical, I totally agree. However, can we make it more legalized? That in the employment contract itself, you say, okay, guys, you have a hot skill or niche skill, and this much of time you need to spend. We pay you extra for that, to training a set of people in the company. So we need to rework on your compensation. You need to rework on your work timings. You need to rework the way you enter into an employment agreement with that person, and at the same time you are doing a larger cause. So this kind of thinking is slowly dawning on, and associations, professional associations are also acknowledging the fact. So it's just a matter of time when new programs will come out, and then which would be industry specific. I think that's my take on that.
So actually, when you talk of that, Geeta, I'm actually reminded, good old days we had these out of cycle promotions, or send them for management programs to an IIM, something like that, kind of a 3-month diploma or something of that sort. I mean, those are like taken for granted today. I mean, employees don't even expect, they say we will pay on our own, we'll go for it, whatever we want to. But when you look at, even ESOPs for that matter, at one time it was a big draw. ESOPs were the stuff, but then employees realized that they were getting locked in for a certain number of years, and they became smarter than that. Of course, the tax incentive took away a lot of the structure away, and that really was never exciting. But when you talk of skills, as Geeta was mentioning, Mr. Prasad, specific niche skills, I don't think there is even today a big industry body. Of course, we had NITs and all at one time, but they were teaching the entry-level people. But today at the mid-level, and even slightly below the mid-level also, we don't see many organizations. There are many online organizations which teach people future skills about machine learning or artificial intelligence or robotics, as I mentioned it, or metaverse or anything. But how do you stay ahead of that learning curve, Mr. Prasad?
My take on the subject is, yes, while these all external impetus or external training might take a longer time for us to get driven through the networks like HRD network or any other professional bodies for that matter. But to me, the way to stay ahead of it is banking on your own people, your own managers. Because all said, if you really peep into the psyche of a manager who was earlier handling a team which was sitting in front of him and managing him, and then he would go and put hand around his direct report shoulder or say, "Aja yaar, let's go for a chai and let's talk it out," kind of. Now the same manager is supposed to handle somebody who is sitting in Nagaland versus in Pune versus in Mumbai. So how does he, and what is that organization can do to really build that capability in him? So I think the first and the foremost thing is building a managerial capability and investing in our own people to really handle this hybrid work, and hybrid is going to stay here for the future. Other thing I really feel is, while some industries are not yet blessed, but most of the industries, millennials are dominating. I see a huge influx of millennials probably, and that is a talent everybody's chasing in the world, not only in India but everywhere. I mean, being young is like being young is a currency now. That's what I say. Okay, so again, it goes down to how are you really teaching your team, how are you teaching your mid-level, front-level leader to deal with people like this who are millennials, because that techie Cody, who can just get an idea and he can solve your million dollar question or $1 million bug in just a jiffy. The idea comes to mind. How do you constantly keep him motivated? And third thing is overall learning as a community, because I think my colleagues will agree here that we were never so networked in the pre-COVID area. Okay, but the moment COVID came in, we all became like we have been born together, kind of, and we shared so much knowledge with each other. And I think that's where we helped our organizations to survive. That's where we leverage knowledge from each other. So I think these communities will have to grow in terms of understanding from each other, in terms of what's best working in your organization and how can it work with me. I think this is how probably the way forward, and how can you be ready for future.
That's best practices is what you talked about, learning from each other. And especially COVID, I think, was not just a learning experience for HR professional, but for everybody, right from production managers to the automobile companies to airlines. Everybody learned their lessons, even the government for that matter, medical sector, for example, how to handle crises like that, which just came unannounced over the thing. As we get into the closing of this very interesting discussion, I want to do a bit of a crystal gazing between the three of you. Pick up the top 3 things which you think will be the most important things in the, say, I won't even call it decade, because decade is too far. Next couple of years, what do you think is the top 3 things that will challenge organizations, especially the HR professionals, as you go forward? And why just worry the HR professional? It should worry the top management too. And I will ask the lady in this panel, Geeta, to start by doing this prediction, or whatever you want to call it, as to what would be the top 3 worries, issues, or problems, if you want to call it that way.
So when you look at problems, such problems were there in almost all the decades of bygone era. But right now we need new solutions, I feel. Yes, engaging the talent would be a bigger problem, as well as a challenge for us to find new solutions. Then also the legal contracting, what we will be very soon seeing, needs a different kind of addressing within the limited legal framework we have in India. We are still in the British Sharia in certain things. So we need to come out of that and do something about it. And the third very important thing is family as a unit has to be more acknowledged than the individual. I think it's not only one employee, but there's a unit around. We need to acknowledge that.
That's something we learned during the COVID time, that the families play a very important role. Many families discovered each other's strengths and weaknesses, and many other things. I mean, sitting around the dining table was something unheard of in the pre-COVID era, but I think during the COVID especially, everybody got into a hunker kind of thing at home, saying we will be there. So my next question, obviously the same 3 things. If Geeta has already not taken up your points, would you like Mr. Prasanna to say that?
So the way I see it for the next probably a decade is, I go back to the lessons that we learn out of it, COVID, and I think each one of us has learned a unique lesson. Each one of us has gone through a different experience, which our earlier generation may have not. At this stage where you are 22 years old or 25 years old, you have seen a pandemic. You have seen recession, you have seen jobs going, jobs coming, getting paid high, getting paid lower. So people have different perspectives of their life, and I think as an HR community, it is very important for us to now understand what goes in somebody's mind. So we got to connect more, we got to understand more, we got to manage better, we got to catch what's going on and customize program, customize our operations, customize our technology in line with what they're expecting. I think that will be the first priority as an HR professional, I would say. Second, like Geeta said, yeah, engagement is the theme, and it will continue to be, because it is impossible unless you give a human touch to somebody to really, I mean, that exit discussion cannot effectively happen over Zoom. You got to be sitting in front of each other and talking to each other and say, okay, tell me what's happened and how can I solve it. It just doesn't happen. I think so connect and team building is important. Third thing is keeping organizations human. I think now I see a rush in most of the corporate, we lost 2.5 years of our productivity, efficiency, my moolahs are all gone, and now I want to make it fast. Yeah, you make it fast, but also make sure that you're dealing with the human beings, and your organization has to be much more human given the setbacks they had, because these are the people who have seen somebody dying in rickshaw without an oxygen cylinder. I've seen somebody, my neighbor died, my auntie died, my uncle died, I lost my father. They've seen what they couldn't have seen otherwise. So we got to be much more human in terms of, as an organization, to retain those talent is what I feel.
Mr. Prasad, often it is said, there are two villains in every organization. I mean, across sectors, I'm not referring to a specific sector. One, of course, is the accounts department, which is often seen as a villain by many an employee, saying, a lot of other things like bills not getting settled or whatever it is, other issue. But the HR also is there, because especially when you talk of your year-ending appraisals and that comes out and nobody really is happy, even if you give them the moon, the sun, the earth, everything put together. But when you look at it as an entirety, as an opportunity to go ahead, I won't ask you now the problems. I would ask you for the opportunities. What are the 3 top opportunities that you see going ahead?
Opportunity is preparing employees of today for the skills of tomorrow. I think that is where is going to limit your great resignation era, your moonlighting, because you're not externally dependent, but you're internally dependent. I would see that as an opportunity, right? And luckily, I feel fortunate that I'm a part of Skillsoft, which we do the skilling and upskilling, and that is our bread and butter. So that's one. And second is, obviously, I know there is no right or wrong model of, permanent remote, half remote, virtual, hybrid. These are going to stay, and these are going to stay for long, at least for the next 1 year, if not more. So I think most important is how do we strike the balance between people who want to come to office, people who want to work remotely, and people who want to come 2 days in a week to 3 days. So I think the biggest task ahead for not just HR, but for the CEOs or for the heads of the organization is striking the balance and making sure that they carry along the business. And third and most important thing is, luckily these 3 are not coinciding with my fellow speakers, the up the ante, right? Up the ante of the employee experience. Gone are those days where you just do engagement activity. No, you want employees to feel they are honored. They should see that they are being valued. I think that is more important than shipping a bag, shipping a bottle, shipping a diary.
Wonderful. It's been a wonderful conversation with you, Mr. Prasad, Geeta, and Mr. Prasanna. I mean, I wish we could go on and on, but we have limitations of time there in terms of the viewability of program. But I'm sure that on another day we can catch up. And it's very rare that you see HR professionals based out of Hyderabad sitting in a television studio and debating on issues like this. Usually you see them in some conference or the other that they tend to speak on such issues. But thank you, thanks a lot really for coming over and being a part of this open forum at Nationalist Hub. This has been a wonderful discussion, and a lot of issues have been looked at and answered in the same zeal. Why we need to appreciate that we may not have all the answers for all the issues that confront us today as human resource professionals. All the 3 of you did talk about what you can do and what you cannot do. That is a great education for many of our viewers at Nationalist Hub. At the end of this very interesting conversation, let me quote Benjamin Franklin. He said, "Hide not your talents. They were made to be used. What's a sundial in a shade?" That's a wonderful way to end this conversation, open forum on Nationalist Hub. Thank you for watching.
Please subscribe to Nationalist Hub English channel for more interesting videos, and don't forget to like and share this video. Nationalist Hub, it's a news revolution.